Welcome to The Analytic Christian, the channel that helps you explore Christian philosophy and theology. I'm Jordan. If you watched the previous video in this playlist, Ask a Scholar number 10, then you saw Dr. Chris Tucker give a defense of phenomenal conservatism that relied on epistemic circularity. So I wanted to make a follow-up video that defended epistemic circularity, and that's what this video aims to do. This is actually a clip that I extracted from a longer interview with Dr. Andrew Moon. So if you'd like to watch that video, then you can click right here and watch the full interview with Dr. Moon. But I'm going to go ahead and begin the clip now. Again, this is a defense of epistemic circularity. So let's start by trying to distinguish the two types of circularity. You can have logical circularity and epistemic. Let's start with logical. What is logical circularity?
Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about circularity, and especially like outside of philosophy context, people might mean all sorts of things. And they might be even meaning different things, like what's the thing that's circular, right? Is it the argument that's circular? Is it the belief that's circular? Is it some sort of other process? So we'll start with logical circularity. It's kind of what's taught in logic textbooks, so it's a little bit more well known. So here it's an argument that's circular. So S's argument for P is logically circular if P is a premise in S's argument for P. So example, premise 1, God exists. Premise 2, God inspired the writings of the Bible. Premise 3, the Bible says God exists, so we conclude God exists. Okay, so this is logically circular because the conclusion, God exists, is also a premise in the argument. And we might say logical circularity might allow for something like either the conclusion itself or something pretty close to the conclusion in the premises. Now, the thing about this is we want to pin down exactly what's wrong with logically circular arguments. It's not that they're not valid in the logician sense, where validity means there's something wrong about the reasoning. Like, in fact, in this argument, the conclusion does follow the premises. So it's what philosophers call deductively valid argument. So this is fine. This is a valid argument. The problem with the argument more is it's not going to be convincing because you're not going to get any independent justification for the conclusion if you didn't already have that justification for the premise. So you're not getting like anything new if your conclusion is already in the premises. Normally, you want an argument to support a claim where you're getting justification from other beliefs, other premises that are going to support the conclusion. That's what you want. But if the conclusion's in the premises, then you're not getting independent support for the argument. So yeah, that's the problem. I wouldn't say it's fallacious. It's just you're not getting any independent justification or support. That's the problem with logical circularity.
Okay, so now let's unpack epistemic
Whoa, this is crazy. What's all this words? Okay, so so epistemic circularity is less well known, and even within epistemology, it started only being focused on, like, with more focus, I guess, in the last 30 years. Of course, it's been around since time immemorial. But okay, so let's just look at what the slide says. S's argument for the conclusion that X is reliable is epistemically circular if S used X to come to believe in one of the premises of that argument. Okay, so let's just start with that. So here, what's circular, epistemically circular, is the argument. Okay, and it's a specific type of argument, and S is arguing for the conclusion that X is reliable. So it's going to be an argument for the conclusion that something's reliable. So if you notice at the example at the bottom of the screen or of the slide, the conclusion is my memory is generally reliable, right? So something about the sort of epistemically circular arguments we're going to be discussing in this video is they always have as their conclusion that something is reliable or something is trustworthy or something is a reliable source of information. Okay, now, so S is arguing for the conclusion that X is reliable is epistemically circular if S used X to come to believe in one of the premises of that argument. So in premise 1, premise 1 says, I remembered something correctly yesterday. Premise 2, I remembered something correctly last week, ... You remember all the times that your memory was reliable, and you conclude, haha, my memory is generally reliable. Okay, in this case, I use memory to support my belief in the premises to come to the conclusion that my memory is generally reliable. So that would make this an epistemically circular argument. Now, the thing about this argument is it's not as clear what's bad about it. It feels bad, but this is actually just how we normally come to discover things. This is what philosophers will call like into good inductive reasoning, where you're just looking at different cases. Oh, that emerald's green, that emerald's green, that emerald's green, and you conclude, oh, okay, all or most or all emeralds are green. Okay, so you're just kind of reasoning from cases. So it's like, okay, my memory was reliable that one time, and this time, and that time. So my memory is generally reliable. It's a perfectly normally taken to be a perfectly fine way of reasoning, but there's something bothersome about the fact that you have to use memory, the thing you're trying to prove to justify belief in the premises. Okay, we can quickly go to that next bullet point. S's belief that X is reliable is epistemically circular if S used X to come to believe that X is reliable. So my belief that my memory is generally reliable, so far as I use my memory to come to my belief that my memory is reliable, that belief is going to be epistemically circular. So epistemic circularity can be a property of arguments. It can also be a property of beliefs.
Yeah, that part I think is relevant. So we're talking about epistemic circularity as a property of one of two things, either an argument or a belief. But with logical circularity, it was just about arguments, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a logical circular argument, like the circularity is in the argument itself. There doesn't have to be an individual. Like there it is. Like they're there. If you think that arguments are abstract objects, it'll be circular in like Plato's heaven and abstract world. But if you go to the epistemic circularity, notice epistemic circularity is always relative to a believer. So especially when it says S used X to come to believe in one of the premises, there the epistemic circularity of the argument immediately brings in an individual. And then, of course, for epistemically circular belief, it's also tied to an individual as well.
Yeah, and I think the memory example is a good example. It's like, why think your memory is reliable? And you might say, well, I remember a lot of things, and they tend to be correct when So I remember I ate a bowl of cereal this morning. What do you know? I ate a bowl of cereal. Got that one right. What else? And you keep going, and you're like, yeah, I kept getting it right. So my memory seems pretty good to me.
Yeah, and I just want to pause, and I hope this might be my love of epistemology coming through, but I just feel like that's so interesting. I feel like anybody who thinks about this for a little bit and wonders whether their memory is reliable, and then you find out that you have to use your memory to come to believe that your memory is reliable, that's a little disturbing and yet really intriguing. So I don't know. I hope people just appreciate that mystery. One of the things I love about philosophy and epistemology, but we should probably keep going on.
Okay. So we've identified that your response to the new challenge is going to rely on epistemic circularity, and we've described what epistemic circularity is. But within epistemic circularity, there can be kind of a good version and a bad version. Right. There can be malignant circularity or benign circularity. So explain the difference here.
Yeah. Well, kind of like what you just said, I'll just read the definition. Malignant circularity is circularity that disqualifies a belief from being justified. Benign circularity that is not malignant. So circularity that doesn't disqualify a belief from being justified. This terminology comes from Mike Bergman, and a lot of I think the best stuff on epistemic circularity has been written by Michael Bergman. He's actually a former student of Alvin Plantinga. They were working on these things around the same time. Okay, now some people might say there is no such thing as benign circularity. By the way, by circularity, we're always meaning epistemic circularity. Let's drop logical circularity. That's not relevant to our discussion. So benign circularity or epistemic circularity, that's what we're talking about. And yeah, so some people might say, yeah, there is no benign circularity. It's all malignant. Okay, and so I'm just going to try to give a very brief case. A lot of this is just borrowing from Bergman and Mike Bergman and Alvin Plantinga. So why should we think that there's at least some benign or justified epistemically circular beliefs? Okay, the first thing to point out is there's not a really like good argument that they're all malignant. Okay, it's really hard to see like what's exactly bad about epistemic circularity. Like that process where I use my memory to come up to believe that my memory is reliable. Like the argument's a fine argument. It's like using good inductive reasoning. There's nothing bad about it. So I guess one thing I would just throw a little bit of burden of proof on the other person. Like, tell me what exactly is bad about malignant circularity. Okay. Now here's what I'll say. Some people will say, well, there's these cases where intuitively it seems really bad to use an epistemically circular reasoning. So here's an example. Let's say I'm at the car salesman. Okay, this is an example from Bergman. And I'm like, hey, car salesman, can I trust you? And the car salesman says, you sure can. You can trust me. And I go, are you honest? And the car salesman says, I sure am honest. I'm like, I go to my wife, like, oh, there, honey. You know, he's very honest. He just said so. Okay, now, using a source to justify the reliability of the source seems bad in this case. Okay, and so that justifies thinking like, okay, there's these cases of malignant circularity where it seems bad to justifiably believe that this car salesman is reliable on the basis of his testimony. Okay, so that's somewhat of an argument. So I'm going to try to respond to that, say it's not a good argument, and then give some arguments for some benign circularity. Okay, so the first is just to point to paradigm cases. Okay, so by paradigm cases are like a paradigm case of justified belief or rational belief. So if I were to address the audience, most of the audience would agree, this example is from Mike Bergman, most of the audience would agree that you have generally reliable cognitive faculties, like your brains are relatively reliable. You're able to form true beliefs about, you know, your environment, whether you have hands, whether 1 + 1 = 2, whether the sun will rise tomorrow. Okay, so most of all of us would agree that that's not only a belief we have that we're somewhat generally reliable, but we're rational. Like that's not an irrational belief. It's not irrational to think that your cognitive faculties are generally reliable, so far as you're not in like an insane asylum or something like that. Okay, so we agree that that's a relatively clear case of a rational belief, not an irrational belief. But if it's a rational belief, then hey, that's actually an epistemically circular belief. Okay, it's an epistemically circular belief because you had to use your cognitive faculties to come to believe that your own cognitive faculties were reliable. Okay, boom, there you go. So that's going to be our case example of an epistemically circular belief. That's a benign case. Anybody who denies that will end up getting stuck in skepticism because there's no way to come to believe that your faculties are reliable without using your faculties. It's impossible. You've got to use your faculties to come to believe your faculties are reliable. So if you deny all benign circularity, if you say all circularity is malignant, then you can't believe that your faculties are reliable, and then you're going to fall into skepticism. Okay, and we said at the beginning of this interview that we're going to assume skepticism is false. Okay. Second point. This point is a point from Alvin Plantinga. Plantinga points out that not even God can know that his own faculties or his mind is reliable without using his own mind. So even God has to use his own mind to come to believe that he himself is reliable and omniscient and so forth. And if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for us. Yeah, and so all right, but then what do we do about the car salesman case? So what Bergman did was he said, you know, what's going on in the car salesman cases, before we talk to the car salesman, we already had some reason to distrust him. I mean, in general, we know car salesmen aren't always out for our own interests. They're out to make a sale. Okay, so which is already going to decrease some of the reliability. Okay, so what Bergman thought is, you know, what makes these instances of circularity bad or unjustified is this. And here's what I'll call Bergman's condition. If S already has a defeater for thinking X is reliable, then using a deliverance of X to support believing that X is reliable will be an instance of malignant circularity. Okay, so using the car salesman example, if you already have a reason to doubt the trustworthiness or reliability of the car salesman, then, well, anything that the car salesman says, you can't really trust it. You'll have a defeater for believing it. Okay, and so you can't bootstrap your way up into thinking that the car salesman is reliable. And so the nice thing about this is it explains why a lot of our cases, why we're inclined to think circularity is malignant. It's because in many of the cases we're trying to justify something in a circular way, we already have a reason to distrust it, like in the car salesman case. But in the God case, God doesn't already initially have a reason to distrust his cognitive faculties. Or we don't initially already have a reason to distrust our own faculties. Or even in the memory case, unless I have some evidence that I might have like a memory disorder, maybe Alzheimer's or something like that. Minus that, I don't already have a reason to think that my memory is unreliable. So all of these cases of circular belief are benign. Yeah, that was long, but yeah, I hope it was clear.
I'm not going to add anything. I thought you did a great job summarizing that. I thought it was really clear. So okay. So your solution is based on epistemic circularity, and there's two types of epistemic circularity. There can be malignant circularity or benign, and you're saying that this case with memory, for example, would be a benign case.
Yeah, and there's no reason to think it's not. There's no good argument to think it's. There are cases where it's bad, like the car salesman, but that's a different case.
And the case, and that's not just for memory, that's just all of our cognitive faculties are going to rely on this kind of epistemic circularity. And so and even God can't, he has to use his own faculties, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. On a lot of people's understanding.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, that would be rather strange if God ends up in skepticism.
Right. Yeah, that would be very disturbing. Yes.